Biology 160, Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology, talking about the lymphatic system. Before we get into this part of the lecture where we'll talk about the other organs that are involved in the lymphatic system, I want to take a minute here and review what you learned about in the last section about how the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system compare. So I'm going to pull up a slide here that lists the lymphatic system on the left, the cardiovascular system on the right. And I want you to stop the recording and take a minute and write down the comparison between these two systems. And think about the vessels, think about the movement, anything that we talked about that compares one to the other. And then restart the video once you're done. Okay, welcome back. Let's see what you came up with to compare these two systems. Let's start with the lymphatic system. So one major difference here is the lymphatic system is a one-way system. So that means that the fluid is only going back towards the heart, whereas the cardiovascular system is a circular system, I guess is how you could say it. Or in other words, it's going away from the heart and then bringing the blood back towards the heart. The cardiovascular system has a pump. The lymphatic system has no pump, and so is a passive system. It's a passive movement of the fluid back towards the cardiovascular system. The pump is the heart, of course, and the arterial side, kind of a side note on this, is the arterial side is pressurized, but the venous side is passive, just like the lymphatic system, even though there's that pump. Again, they both have capillaries. There we go, that's better. Though the lymphatic, maybe we could say, are more leaky, maybe, that they're able to pick up a lot more. The capillaries of the cardiovascular system let fluid come out of the capillaries, but the capillaries in the cardiovascular system are picking up not just fluid, but cells and bacteria, all sorts of debris and things like that as it's moving back. The vessels are similar to veins, in that they are passive, which we already talked about. They have valves, and there's milking action of muscles, of skeletal muscles, as well as there is the smooth muscle on the larger vessels that moves the fluid back towards the cardiovascular system. So in this way, the vessels are very similar to the veins in the cardiovascular system. Also, the one other difference between the two systems is the function, of course. I'll put that, kind of squeeze that in the top here. So the function of the lymphatic system is the cleanup system, bringing the fluid back towards the heart, cleaning out the fluid. Cardiovascular system's function is to take that fluid all around the body in order to give the cells the nutrients that they need. So that's a little overview about some of the things we talked about last time. Let's go on now and look at the different organs of the lymphatic system. Here's a slide that shows the other organs besides the lymph nodes and the vessels that we already saw. And some of these organs we've seen before, just a little bit, and we'll see some again. And most I'm sure you've probably heard about before. There's the spleen. The spleen is an interesting organ. It's on the left side of the abdomen. Its job is to filter blood. In adults, mainly what it does is it breaks down worn out red blood cells. And that's why if you have some sort of disease like sickle cell anemia where your blood cells are breaking down your spleen is going to become enlarged, and it's going to be having to work overtime and may fail because it's having to clean up all the pieces of the red blood cells that are caused by that disease. In an infant or a fetus, the spleen also is active in producing blood cells. Once you're born, once you become an adult, that's taken over by the bone marrow that is found only in the flat bones. And then last of all, it also acts as a blood reservoir, meaning that there's a little bit of extra blood there that's not actively circulating through the body, that if you start to lose some blood, can be ejected from the spleen, as well as the liver. The liver also stores blood. They can eject the blood back into the blood system, the cardiovascular system, to try to return the amount of blood you have to normal levels and keep things working correctly. We have the thymus located here in the throat. And this is most active during youth. By the time you're an adult, the thymus actually gets smaller in size, though it does still function in the immune system, specifically in helping to mature lymphocytes, which we'll see later in this lecture. In order to do that, it produces some hormones that it sends out. Next, we have the tonsils. Most people are familiar with tonsils. These are found in the back of your throat and above your throat. There's a number of tonsils. And these tonsils are very important in catching foreign material that's entering your airway or your digestive system. So as you're breathing, you can breathe in bacteria and viruses, and these tonsils are there to catch that, and they're lymphoid organs, and so they have lymphocytes, immunoresponse cells, and so they'll start attacking the bacteria and trying to get rid of those. As it does its job, though, as the tonsils do their job, as they're catching these foreign substances, they can swell and become infected, and that's okay because they're doing their job, but that can become a problem and can lead to something called tonsillitis. And in the past, tonsillitis was a common reason to remove the tonsils, and in fact, tonsils were removed a lot from individuals. But today, tonsils aren't taken out as much as they used to be. So they are an important, they do have an important function in the lymphatic system, and so they try to leave them in as much as they can. And it's also a very painful surgery to have the tonsils removed. There's something called Peyer's patches, and you can see these. These are little bits of tissue that are found throughout the digestive system and also found on the appendix. And these little Peyer's patches are little patches of lymphoid tissue that house, again, response cells, lymphocytes, macrophages that can actively fight against foreign material. So notice that we find these, for example, the tonsils are in your airway, so that things trying to enter that way can be fought. But you also have bacteria that are trying to get in through your digestive system as well, and so these Peyer's patches are found throughout the intestine to try to fight back and make sure that you don't get any foreign material, foreign organisms getting through, entering your body through the digestive system or through the large intestine. And large intestine has a population of bacteria that normally live there. A lot of them are beneficial, but again, we don't want bacteria getting into our body or infecting us that way, and so these Peyer's patches do their job there. Peyer's patches, tonsils are all part of an immune response called MALT, and that stands for MUCOSA-ASSOCIATED lymphoid tissue. And these are just little pieces of tissue scattered throughout the body in different places, working to keep our body safe. Here you can see the MALT and what that stands for. Peyer's patches, tonsils, and then other places where you have the lymphoid tissue. So those are the organs of the lymphatic system that are working with the lymph nodes and the lymphatic vessels in order to make sure that everything is happening as it's supposed to, and make sure to keep our body safe and make sure that no foreign substances are able to enter our body and attack our body. From here on out in the rest of the lectures, the rest of the parts of the lectures on the lymphatic system, we're going to be looking specifically at the immune system, our body's defense system. This is a little chart here that shows the lineup of defense that we have in our body. Our body has a number of ways to try to fight off and make sure that things don't get inside our body, and we can see them here. Every day, it doesn't matter where you are, where you live, you're always coming in contact with foreign substances, bacteria, fungi, viruses. There's always this battle going on. A lot of times, again, we don't even know about it, but it's always going on. And so we have ways to try to fight against this battle, against the foreign warriors that are trying to take over our body. This comes in two main packages. We have what's called innate, which is non-specific defenses, and then we have very specific or adaptive defenses. In other words, we have, think about if this is like an army here, we're fighting against some sort of foreign mercenary or something that's trying to get inside our body. The innate defenses, these would be defenses that we set up that are just trying to keep everything out. So this would be a wall around our city. If you think about castles in the olden days, innate defenses would be the wall. You'd have the moat. You have the drawbridge. And so all these things are set up just to try to keep everything out. It's not specifically targeting a certain warrior or a certain enemy. It's just to protect your city in general. And the adaptive or the specific defenses, and this would be more like your specific soldiers that you're sending out to fight a specific enemy. You're targeting a certain group, whatever it might be. And so we have this in our body as well. So our innate defenses are non-specific. For example, the wall around our body, we have our skin. So that's our very first line of defense, and it does a very good job. So our skin is set up so that it is very hard for bacteria, fungi, for viruses to get into and attack our body. We also have the mucous membranes that we've talked about before. So the parts of our body on the inside of our body that are in contact with the outside, our digestive system, our respiratory tract, are set up to catch foreign material. For example, your respiratory tract, as you're breathing in, you're pulling in these substances. Along your respiratory tract, we have these cells that are producing this mucus, and the mucus is there to catch foreign material, whether it be dust, which is not necessarily going to attack us, but it can be dangerous to our respiratory system, but also viruses, bacteria. They get stuck in the mucus, and then the mucus can be removed from our body or spit out or swallowed or whatever, and we're able to get around, keep from becoming infected in that way. So our skin and our mucous membranes do a very good job there. We also have secretions from our skin and other mucous membranes that within the secretions we have chemicals that are secreted that also actively attack and get rid of foreign substances. Some examples. We've talked about some of these examples before when we talked about the integumentary system. So the skin is keratinized, and that creates a barrier to pathogens. But then also we produce secretions. We produce the sebum, the oils that are secreted from our skin, and within that there are chemicals that are toxic to bacteria that inhibit bacterial growth. And then also the acidic pH of the skin secretions, our sweat and things like that, and also our urine, which is more acidic, also helps to fight against bacteria. Also in the vagina of females, there are secretions that are very acidic and keep microorganisms from attacking and growing there. Our stomach and our digestive system. Our stomach is the first step in our digestive system. Very acidic environment. It can get rid of and kill a lot of pathogens. And then also our saliva. And then in the section on the eye, we talked about the lacrimal fluid, which contains lysozyme, which is the enzyme that breaks down bacteria as well. And so we have all these types of secretions that are put out by our body that are also there to fight and make sure that we're not infected by these different bacteria. Of course, these defenses aren't perfect, so things do get through. If you cut your skin, that compromises your skin, it can become infected. Our stomach is able to kill a lot of bacteria, but there are some bacteria that can make it through the acidic conditions. So it's not perfect, but this is like the wall around our castle. This is just to try to keep foreign things out. It's our first line defense in order to keep ourselves healthy. But that's why we have the secondary defenses. So if something does get through, now we have our second line defense that's going to come in. Again, still non-specific. We're just trying to fight invaders in general. But if anything is gonna get through, then we have our second line of defense that'll come into play and try to fight back against this. So examples of our second line of defense. We have phagocytic cells, we have antimicrobial proteins, we have inflammatory response. All of these things are important, and we're going to look at these in turn. So, our second line of defense. First, let's look at phagocytes. There's also things called natural killer cells, which is a really cool name, and we'll look at what they do. Inflammatory response, antimicrobial proteins, and fever. These are phagocytes. Phagocytes are white blood cells that are just traveling around the body. They're not necessarily specific to any sort of bacteria. Their job is just to go around, find these bacteria, and get rid of them. So things such as neutrophils, the most common type of white blood cell. Macrophages as well. They come in contact with these bacteria, they'll engulf them, they'll phagocytize them, pull them in, break them down, and then digest them away. And so these guys are they're like patrols that are patrolling our body. They run into bacteria. So you can see here, this little guy up here, this is our bad guy. And here's our macrophage that's flowing around inside our body. He's going to engulf that little bacteria, that little particle, whatever it might be. He pulls it inside a vesicle. And then over here we have the lysosome, which we talked about when we talked about the parts of the cell, which is full of these enzymes, digestive enzymes. And that lysosome is going to fuse with this vacuole that holds the foreign particle. And then it's going to digest it into pieces. It's basically going to kill it. Get rid of it, destroy it, and then it'll get rid of the pieces out the other end. So this is a pretty amazing process, and these guys are just walking around, or crawling around our body, maybe is a better way to say it, looking for these foreign substances and getting rid of them for us. We also have these things called natural killer cells. And these are also non-specific cells, but their job is to get rid of cells that may be infected or cancerous, whatever it might be. And so again, these guys are just like the phagocytes. They're just crawling around the body, looking, checking the cells. If they find a cell that's cancerous, that's not doing its job, then it can trigger that cell to kill itself, basically, to die. Also virus-infected cells. So these cells, when they're infected by viruses, will put out a little antigen. They'll put out a little signal on the outside of their cell. Natural killer cells will come by, see that signal, and then they can kill the cell. So we have these guys running around too, which is a good thing. Then you have something called the inflammatory response, which we're all familiar with, because this is the inflammation that happens when we're injured, when something happens to us. There's some things here that are associated with this inflammatory response. We have redness, heat, swelling, and pain. I want to point out, as we look at these effects of the inflammatory response, notice that there is no fever associated with these. So redness, heat, pain, swelling. Fever is not part of the inflammatory response. It's still a defense mechanism, and we'll talk about it here in just a moment, but it's not part specifically of the inflammatory response. What the inflammatory response does do is it prevents the spread of damaging agents. So it basically holds everything in that area and keeps it from spreading around the body, and that includes pathogens and other infectious material that can hurt our body. And then as it holds it in that area, then it's able to dispose of that through phagocytosis. So the white blood cells are going to come into that area, and they're going to start eating up everything that is damaged, or things we don't want there to be there, and then that allows us to then go in and start repairing this area. So inflammatory response, although sometimes it may be sort of annoying, it limits our mobility and makes it so that we can't do the things that we normally do. It's a very, very important part of the healing process. And the way this happens is with the release of histamines and other chemicals from the damaged areas of the body, which starts this response system that results in the redness, the heat, pain, and swelling. So what happens is, as these histamines are released, the capillaries become leaky, first of all. So the capillaries normally are leaky. The fluid is able to leave, the oxygen, the nutrients are able to leave the blood through the capillaries and be available for the cells. But in the inflammatory response, they're even more leaky than normal. And so you get this excess fluid that's building up inside in the areas around the tissues. And we call this edema. And it has a few results, and one is swelling, so that area is going to swell up. And swelling is another thing that can sometimes be annoying and debilitating, but it appears that swelling is important in mobilizing that area, making it so you don't move that area so that the healing process can happen, you don't do more damage. And then also pain is associated with it as well. Pain can be something that we don't want to deal with, and it makes it so that we're not able to function normally. And some people have chronic pain, which can be very debilitating. But pain itself is very important. The reason we know this is that there's some people that don't feel any pain, so they have a disorder that makes it so they don't feel pain. And what we find with those people is that they don't live much past their teenage years, because say they break a bone, they don't know they broke a bone because they don't feel any pain, and so they'll keep walking on, they'll keep using it, and the bone's going to grind against each other, and it's going to create even more problems. And so pain, even though we may not like it, it's important in being able to heal ourselves. Then also what happens is the blood vessels dilate, and this is important in increasing the blood flow to the area, which is going to bring a lot more nutrients to that area so that the cells can start reproducing. They need energy and other nutrients in order to reproduce. It's also going to increase the heat, which increases the metabolism. So the cells are going to be working faster in order to fix everything, and then also redness is going to happen as well. And then finally, this is going to bring the neutrophils and other white blood cells to the area so they can start cleaning up the mess through phagocytosis. And so all these things lead to eventually the healing process happening. The white blood cells that are coming to the area follow the kind of the scent of the chemicals that are released. So here's our area where we were hurt. So our skin is penetrated by a nail or something like that, for example, or we get a cut. You can see little pathogens trying to get in here. But these cells that were damaged, they release these chemicals. You can see that there's a high concentration of these histamines here, but these histamines are slowly going to diffuse out, so there's kind of this gradient over time. So these neutrophils are flowing around in the blood vessels, and they'll recognize these chemicals, and they'll know that they need to go to an area to help clean it up. And so they do something called diapedesis. And this is when they're able to leave the red blood cells. They actually crawl out of the red blood cells and move towards that area that was damaged. And they follow that chemical signal. So it's just like a scent. So they follow where they can smell where the scent isn't very strong, and then they start following it closer and closer. Just like, say you're in the other room and you start to smell a pie, and you're going to get up and you can follow that scent to where it's really strong in the kitchen and find where the pie is. And that's what these neutrophils are going to do as well. And then they're going to start eating up the bacteria and the cell debris and stuff like that are around that area. So this is an inflammatory response, a very important part of the healing process and our second defense system as well. I want to talk just briefly about some other chemicals that become important in our second line of defense, and these are antimicrobial proteins. These are proteins that are produced by our body in order to keep microorganisms from growing and reproducing. There's two main types that I want to mention: complement proteins and interferons. Complement proteins, these are some proteins flowing around in the blood that what they do is when they're activated, they find a cell that is a foreign cell or a damaged cell, a cancerous cell, and these proteins basically poke a hole in the cell. Every cell has a plasma membrane, which is kind of the covering of that cell. As long as the plasma membrane's in place, that cell is okay. But if you poke a hole in that plasma membrane, suddenly everything's going to come flowing out, and that cell is basically going to die. And that's what these complement proteins do. And here's a little slide showing this. So this is the plasma membrane of a cell here, and this cell has been targeted because it's a pathogen. It's either a foreign cell or it may be a cancerous cell or something like that. This triggers the complement proteins to attach to that cell. So notice how there's a number of proteins, they all attach, and as that happens, they produce this hole in the cell, and everything, all the cell contents come flowing out, and suddenly that cell's not able to survive anymore. We also have interferons, and these are proteins that are produced by infected cells infected by viruses. So viruses, when they attack a cell, they attach to the outside of that cell, and then they send their DNA inside, and that DNA or RNA, depending on the type of virus, is going to take over that cell, and that cell becomes a virus-producing factory. And so these interferons will be sent out by the virus-infected cell. What they do is they prevent viruses from attaching to other non-infected cells. So almost acts as a blocker so that these viruses can't then go and attack other cells. So these are proteins that are important in our second line defense as well. Then finally there's fever. Fever is when you have an abnormally high body temperature, and our body normally has this thermostat, it's set to a certain temperature, and that's determined by the hypothalamus. So it sets our temperature at 98.6. But in the presence of things called pyrogens, which are released by white blood cells, which would be involved in some sort of infection or something like that, these pyrogens are emitted. That causes the hypothalamus to ratchet up our body heat. And so we get this fever. And it's a good thing, because there's a number of things that fever does. Is it increases the metabolism of the body, increases the speed of tissue repair. Then also it inhibits the release of iron and zinc from the liver and spleen. And these are minerals that are needed by the bacteria that are infecting us. And so it keeps them from growing and developing as well. And then once our infection is gone, then the hypothalamus will move that thermostat back to its previous spot, and we'll be back to normal, basically, I guess. So, but again, this fever is not part of the inflammatory response. This is still a second line defense, but it's a different mechanism that's going on.